about NFT drop, you go, okay, well, what's so cool about that? It was tied into this fashion thing, and there was this whole narrative where it was like a live-action role-play game that happened in the streets. It was like dark and a little dangerous and kind of cool. Anyway, it was amazing. You blew my mind. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. It's like, why can't we do games in the real world? Well, you showed me it was possible, and in service of a brand. So it's also like, commercial, right on. You got to meet them later on and talk about it.
Yeah, and definitely. We have both Rod and Ed and myself. We worked on this project. Last time we talked about what we were going to do as the next phase of that. The computer you see up here was the result of the launch that we did a little over a month ago. So definitely reach out and talk about this beacon program that we've established. You play an augmented reality video game, you earn this NFT, you find portals, 50 portals globally around the world that you partner up with other people to unlock, and then you interact with this artificial intelligence that's one of the main characters of the brand. And then as you go, you can take your beacon, level it up, and then earn unlocks prizes, t-shirts, digital assets, and access into a whole new ecosystem of the brand. And we did that with no cost to the consumer. And for a brand that's a hyper luxury brand, that items regularly cost over €1,000, to have something that you could earn with no cost is like a really neat thing, I think. So.
It's like an immersive story that you can choose to drop into, and it's there all the time. And so most of the world passes by and they're oblivious to this. But the people who are playing the game are tuned into it. And I just love that idea that there's like an alternate dimension you can unlock. Check it out, it's Rod, he's back here, he's the guy with the goatee.
Yes.
That was awesome. But then the month before, you had Evan McMillan here. And she held forth about digital identity, which is usually like a really arcane and gnarly topic, and it's not that much fun to listen to. It can be quite boring. I spent 6 years working on this subject, I can tell you from experience. It's a tough topic. She was brilliant and fun to listen to and effervescent and so intelligent. So I'm telling you, if you haven't been before, you got to make sure you come back to this Web3 salon. I love it. I'm thrilled to be here. I don't know if I can deliver at that level, so now I'm like a little intimidated. Your question is about futurism, okay? So for 30 years, I've been going around the world. Every time there's a new technology or a new platform, I try to figure out, like, what can we do with this thing? What kind of experience can we create with it? And usually it's going to involve entertainment. In my career, it's usually about branded entertainment. I've done this in Asia, I've done it in China, I've done it in Japan, I've done it all over Northern Europe and Southern Europe, Latin America, and North America. And wherever I go, I try to meet the people in that region who are focused on the future. Because I want to understand, like, what's the local future? If I'm in China, I want to talk to a Chinese futurist or an Indian futurist in India. And so I was telling someone I do this, and they said, how come you don't have a podcast? I was like, oh, yeah, good idea. I probably should record these conversations. That would be a good idea. So a year ago, I started doing that with a friend of mine, Brett King, who is like a fintech guy, who's also a sci-fi geek. And we started doing interviews a year ago, and I'm happy to tell you that today, the Futurist podcast is the #1 future podcast in the world on all platforms. So we're totally having a great time with that. Check it out. We talked to synthetic biologists, we talked to NASA mission controllers who put little robots on Mars, and so on. It's a great show. It's really fun. Every week we have a different person on the show.
It's truly one of the best listens. And I dive deep into Web3, NFT, listen to crypto, Bankless podcast, Vaporized JPEGs, and then when I want to like decompress from that and like let my mind flow about what is happening across multiple industries and like the furthest reaches of like stretching what the technological capabilities of what we're going to do as humans. Robert brings onto his podcast those individuals. So it's really, really impressive. And they're really well done. They're not too long. They're right at around 45, 50 minutes. And you just plow through it, especially if you're like me and you play them at 1.5 speed.
It's sort of like a drive time radio show. It's like two dorks asking questions of some really smart people. But here's the funny thing about futurists is people are in completely different fields. We'll talk to a biologist, we'll talk to a science fiction writer, we talk to a transhumanist candidate for president. So people from different walks of life, but they all share one thing in common. They all have a methodology for thinking about the future. And that's what we always try to get to. It's like, so what's your discipline? Like, how do you arrive at these ideas? And some are good, some are a little bit questionable. So if you want to know like the methodology for thinking about the future, it's actually it boils down to something very simple. I don't think anyone would ever say it this way, but basically there's two ways to think about the future. Trend forecasting, right? That's where you observe a current trend and you go, gee, what would that be like 10 years from now? If everything else holds true, what will happen when that thing becomes a really big trend? Now, the world never works like that because other trends intersect and it gets quite complicated quite quickly. So the skill is to like kind of anticipate how that might happen, and you end up with a range. You don't end up with one possibility, it's a range of probabilities. So that's trend forecasting. You start from today and you project out into the future. And there's another way to do it. The second way to do it is basically the inverse of that, where you say, okay, let's imagine a scenario in the future. Oh, that'd be pretty cool. You know, like let's say we want to go to Mars. Okay, well, what would it take to get to Mars? And you work your way back to the present moment and you identify all the contingencies that have to be true. Like what facts must be true in order for that story to become real. And if you think about it, they're the same thing, right? They're the inverse of each other. One is starting from today and projecting out. The other one is starting from the future and working your way back to the present. And it's actually quite useful to do both. Because if you do both, you can start to find opportunity. And there's a concept called the adjacent possible, which I love to think about. If you, gosh, there's a great book, I think a book called How We Got to Now, that talks all about this concept. The adjacent possible is the concept that every time there's a new technology or a new platform, it makes possible a whole range of new things that previously were unthinkable. And every new advance, like NFT, great example, right? NFT unlocked all these possibilities. That's what this community is actually focused on, right? Before there was NFT, there really wasn't a way for artists to get paid in digital media. And it kind of sucked to be a digital artist because you're getting ripped off. It was like MP3 to the max, right? For a visual artist, it was terrible. NFT came along, okay, it's not perfect, but hey, it unlocked a tidal wave of creativity and all these new experiences that previously were unthinkable. So that's the adjacent possible. And so if you think about the future, and you start to identify the steps that must be accomplished, the facts that must be true in order for that scenario to come to pass, you're going to start to identify possibilities, and then you can start to think what must happen to make that possibility happen. And if you build that thing, I guarantee you other people are thinking about it, and you'll unlock a tidal wave of innovation. So anyway, we talk about that in the show, and what I want to share with you today is one idea.
Tell us about this very ambitious goal versus like 1 million jobs.
Yeah. That's it.
Basically, right?
So like right now everybody's freaking out about AI. Everybody's like, oh, AI is going to steal our jobs. It's not going to happen. Don't believe the doomsayers. I don't believe that hype. Don't you buy into that hype. It's not going to happen. But everybody is freaking out about jobs. And it's probably true. Some people are going to get displaced by automation. That always happens. That's the story of automation. That's not new. If you want to think about the future of jobs, you have to kind of go, okay, where will the new opportunities be? So we do a little this scenario planning exercise. We say, okay, what new thing is happening now that's going to unlock a tremendous opportunity in the very near future? Well, one proven technique for forecasting is Ray Kurzweil's. You all know Ray Kurzweil, right? He works for Google. He's the guy that wrote The Singularity is Near, which is an awesome book. He's got a new one out called The Singularity is Nearer. It just came out last week. Original. But it's really worth looking at. And his methodology for forecasting, he'll tell you he's got the most accurate forecast. I don't know if that's true. But his methodology is really a good one, which is to look at semiconductor roadmaps. And he says, okay, if you know what the semiconductors are doing, if you know what the microprocessors are doing in the future, you can make a reasonable forecast about new businesses that will be possible. And he's done this many, many times. And he created the first text-to-speech, the first synthesizers and so on. And it was all based on his understanding of what semiconductors would be able to do. It's like, oh, in 4 years, there'll be a semiconductor that can compose music, that can render music. And he started Kurzweil, which was one of the first synthesizer companies. And made a fortune. He's done that many, many times. So today, if you look at the world of semiconductors, everybody knows about Moore's law, which is a law that says the number of transistors on a chip will double every 18 months, which is a geeky way of saying chips get cheaper, faster, better, right? And so as stuff gets cheaper, faster, and better, we tend to use more of it. That's just a basic law of economics. But Moore's law kind of petered out. It ran great for 50 years. So that today, everybody's got a smartphone in their pocket that's like a supercomputer, right? Compared to a computer even 10 years ago, as recently as that, your computer in your pocket is way more powerful. But Moore's law kind of peaked out. It's just a function of physics. You can't cram more transistors on a chip. They're using electron microscopes to move molecules on a chip. That's how they're managing them now. So we've reached the physical limitations of miniaturization on a CPU, central processing unit. That law held true for 50 years, but it started to slow down. But Moore's law just jumped to a different kind of chip, and this is what I want you to pay attention to. You know where I'm going. Graphical processing units, right? It used to be that graphics processing card that you had in your PC in the 90s so that you could play a cool video game in 3D, because the CPU couldn't render that. And gradually that card became a chip. The chip's called a GPU. The company that makes GPUs, that designs the best GPUs, the leading company in the category, is NVIDIA. And now everybody's heard about NVIDIA because finally the whole world's figured out NVIDIA is driving the next phase of technological growth. NVIDIA GPUs have improved in the last 5 years by a factor of 1,000. So they're outpacing Moore's law. They're improving at a much, much faster clip, meaning that the price performance is dropping such that you get 1,000 times more computing power today than you got before the pandemic. But it doesn't stop. And if you listen to the CEO, who's a brilliant speaker, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, he'll tell you it's going to continue, meaning over the course of the next 5 years, it'll be a million-fold increase in computer performance. Now, you have to stop this for a second and go like, wait, 1 million times more powerful. What could we do with that? Well, there's your possibilities, right? That's your adjacent possible. There's a range of possibilities. So graphical processing units are a little different from CPUs. CPUs are multitasking. They're doing all the processes at one time, and they they have a physical limitation. Parallel processing is what a GPU can do. And parallel processing means it's almost an infinite ability to scale the processing power, at least for the foreseeable future. So you want to think about what computing processes benefit most from parallel processing. Here we can make a really clear forecast about the future. And so this has been underway for about 5 years, maybe a little longer than that, maybe 10 years. And if you think about, like, gee, what were the big innovations over the last 8 years and the innovations that are coming in the next 5 or 10 years? What do you know? They all benefit from parallel processing. So start with crypto mining, right? That was the first thing that was consuming a ton of NVIDIA chips. Next thing, what else can you do with parallel processing? Deep learning, especially large language models. No surprise, we have this abundance of artificial intelligence happening right now. That's no accident, it's because we finally have the chips. The algorithms existed long before. The data was piling up on the web. We have tons and tons of data. What we didn't have was the cheap processing power, but it just came into that price performance sweet spot where we can start to run large language models. Lo and behold, boom, here it is, artificial intelligence. And if you follow me, you can project out a little bit and say, wow, as the cost of compute comes down and the quality of the processing goes up, we're going to have artificial intelligence everywhere. And if it continues to help out the crypto world, we're going to have decentralization everywhere. And there's a third thing that we can forecast with some accuracy using this technique, which is, of course, what GPUs were originally intended for, real-time 3D. Real-time 3D, if you haven't been playing video games lately, it's astounding how good the quality of the new game engines are. I'm talking about Unreal and Unity. It's astounding because it's almost like cinematic, high-quality video. You can render that on the fly, and it's just going to get better and better and better everywhere. So the future is pretty easy to predict. It's going to be decentralized, it's going to have artificial intelligence, and it's going to be more and more 3D every single day. Yeah, go for it. That was a long lineup to this. This is so I'm working with Unity, among other companies. I've built a network of businesses to create 1 million jobs. If you know anything about mobile games, you'll know that Unity is the most popular game engine for mobile games. About 70% of mobile games are built using Unity. Unity is also great for virtual worlds. So all that Metaverse stuff that Facebook built was built on Unity. And all the mixed reality that Apple just showed on Monday with their new Vision Pro headset, that's also powered by Unity.
I think one of the really interesting things that Robert is digging into now we've been talking about the metaverse sort of, and everybody's like, well, how are we going to get to this metaverse? We don't have the computing power, we don't have the processing speed, what device are we going to put it on? But I think you have a really interesting take on the real applications of the metaverse right here, right now, and what that's going to...
I think it's coming up in this tape, but maybe not. No, it's okay, just let it run, we'll just talk at the top of it. So...
Sorry.
Oh, it's too noisy.
We'll let this thing play.
This is the eye candy portion of the show. Actually, it's kind of a funny thing because technology firms are not great at marketing. And if you notice, did you see Apple's Vision Pro thing on Monday? Yeah. Did you notice the words they didn't use? augmented reality, metaverse, like they just, some editor in their marketing department was like, remove all the jargon. Like we're doing this demo, but we're taking out all that stuff. And all those words now sort of feel tainted.
It's like why we can't say NFT anymore.
You know, that's, yeah, well, listen, NFT to begin with, right? And then add wallets on top of that. It's like, yeah, you got a couple of onboarding problems there. But it was interesting because on Monday I was watching all that and I was like, oh my God, Facebook just turned into BlackBerry. Like in real time. So a lot of folks were bummed out when Facebook retreated from the metaverse because it was felt like an endorsement of something that the people in the decentralized world have been talking about for a long time. Because metaverse started there many, many years earlier. The notion of like virtual worlds that we could participate in, but they were decentralized concepts. And of course, what Facebook was launching was the exact opposite, kind of an Orwellian fascist Disneyland that you would go to. No surprise, it failed. They were like going, I'm not so sold on this idea. It just seemed lame and done, and it landed with a thud. But when they pulled back, it's interesting because the stock went shooting up, right? So the investors in Facebook were thrilled. They're like, get out of that. That's a bad zone. So I think the people that have been working diligently in the Web3 community got bummed out by that a little bit because they're like, oh, that was like the best example of this thing. And you know, Decentraland and Sandbox, you haven't really caught the public imagination in a massive way. So some people felt like the air came out of the metaverse balloon. I do not believe this. I do not share that idea. And I'm here today to tell you about a second phase of metaverse that's happening right now at a much bigger scale that's going to mainstream this. So if this is a topic that's of interest to you, and I know it is for some of the folks that come here, my message is one that's very positive. The metaverse hasn't died, it's just shifted over to industry. So right now, industry is adopting real-time 3D digital twins at a rapid clip. And by that I mean like 40% of industrial companies are adopting it right now. Every business I've talked to, and I've talked to people in automotive and aerospace, I've talked to city planners, I've talked to people who do transportation, energy, mining, and so forth. They're all adopting real-time 3D digital twins. What's a digital twin? A digital twin is a high-fidelity replica of a physical thing in a digital form. So if you're doing an NFT drop for some sort of fashion thing and you're making like virtual purses for Hermes or whomever, that's a digital twin of a physical object. And it's an easy forecast to say it's very likely to me in the next 10 years, we're gonna have digital twins for everything. And so all of that crypto stuff that we've been working on, and all those tools that we've tried to design and develop, and all those game and marketing schemes that we've been thinking about for NFTs, they're gonna become increasingly important for brand marketers. Because there'll be a digital equivalent for every physical item. That's just the marketing piece of it. That also touches retail in certain interesting ways, like loyalty and so forth. But that's not where it stops. In fact, that's not even the biggest piece of it. The biggest piece of it is every automotive factory on the planet Earth right now has a digital twin. So it's a high fidelity version of that factory rendered in digital media. And they do that for optimization purposes. So it's purely operational. They call them operational twins. Okay, so everybody's like going, wow, this got really boring. Like, I know, it's industry. But here's the thing that's cool about this. What I'm saying is the biggest and most powerful companies in the world are adopting the metaverse. They're conferring credibility on it. They're seeing benefits from it. And what they see sometimes is extraordinary productivity increases. The folks at BMW said that they saw a 40% productivity increase in their factory in South Carolina when they did a digital twin. And it makes sense, right? Because think about how you build a factory, or frankly, any kind of complicated building. You get architects, a bunch of smart guys, usually, sitting around a room with some paper doing blueprints, and they think they figured out how to optimize this thing, and then you go build it. I guarantee you that's like ancient history, right? That idea, what I just said, is how most stuff gets built today. Even like subways and airports, and like very complicated structures get built that way. In the future, here's how everything's going to get built. You build a digital twin first, and you build it at such a high degree of fidelity that you can run simulations. You can actually apply artificial intelligence to it and say, run every scenario. I want to see 1,000 different scenarios and show me the high probability outcomes and the low probability outcomes. Okay, let's take a closer look at the high probability outcomes. Do we like those outcomes? No. Okay, let's change something in the model. We can change a variable, run the simulation again. And now we can start to figure out and ultimately optimize. It's like that old rule you have in carpentry, measure twice, cut once. But in the future, for any architecture or any new development, it'll be do 1,000 or 1,000,000 simulations and then build the optimal version.
But who will be the architect?
Oh, well, so it's interesting. You talk to architecture firms today, and they're all kind of blasé about this because they're like, oh yeah, we're using 3D because they've been using CAD tools for 30 years, right? Now those are static 3D models. You can spin them around and stuff. But if you take that CAD/CAM model and you import it into something like Unity's game engine, then what you can do is you can start to add real-time physics to it. You can add weather. You can populate it with people and animals and trees that move like trees do. You can see what the weather looks like in the winter and the summer. You can see how much of a shadow it creates in the height of the summertime in case it's going to cast a shadow or something. This is stuff that architects never previously had to deal with. And I guarantee this is going to be a baseline. Okay.
You're not answering the question. Sorry.
Okay. What would you like to know, sir?
How will architecture relate to what humans need? And how will technologies that are now available make that available? Simple question.
Can you say again?
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the point. Are you really looking for an answer to the question, or are you trying to make a point? Why don't you just make the point?
I'm looking for an answer to the question.
Okay, I can't tell from the way you're phrasing it.
Can you ask
All architects, you're describing architects, all architects make environments more positive for human beings. And how will technology, which we all adhere to, which we all love, make that more effective?
Okay, thanks. I couldn't quite hear you. It's a little difficult to hear up here. So I believe that architects are going to use the technology I'm describing in order to make a variety of scenarios. And then they can see which of these scenarios actually works. But it won't just be the architects that make that decision. For instance, when we talk about city-scale digital twins, so we take the entire city, we do photogrammetry, and we model the city, that can become a tool to build public support for policy. So now let's say I'm taking it out of the hands of the architect and putting it in the hands of the public, so the public can weigh in. That's a pretty radical notion, what I'm sharing right now. No one's doing that yet, but I think that's a future outcome. I think it's a very possible outcome. Because right now, most city planners are having trouble getting people to buy into any kind of development. There's a NIMBY process. Here in California, nobody wants any development to happen in their area. And so we have to show people, citizens, that there are going to be future impacts. Whether you make a decision to do something or you choose not to do it, there's still going to be future outcomes with consequences. And if you can show people those consequences, and a great way to do this with 3D, that's how we visualize stuff, then people can buy into the outcome that they think is optimal. So those are a couple different ways of answering it, but honestly, the question you're answering is so open-ended, because you're saying, how will people use these tools? The answer is a lot of ways. I could go on and on. I don't think we want to do that. We could. I can talk to you later if you like. The point I'm trying to make here is simple, that the way we've been building the world, the physical world, has not been optimal. It's basically somebody's best guess. And there's always consequences, unanticipated consequences. An example, right here in LA, during the pandemic, in my neighborhood in Hollywood, they built dozens and dozens of new buildings. If you notice, you drive down Santa Monica Boulevard, and there's whole block-sized developments that went up. Now, each of those buildings has hundreds of units. Sometimes they have 400 units. Each unit has a couple of cars, on average. So a building with 400 units, 800 cars, they take average two car trips a day. That's 1,600 car trips on the streets of Hollywood. Did anyone model out the consequences of building dozens of new buildings that are each putting thousands of new car trips on the streets every day? Of course they did. No surprise, we've got a traffic problem. This is the kind of thing that in the future you'll simulate. You'll see the consequences, and before the zoning authority greenlights development, you have to show that there's at least some way to deal with that with traffic. It might mean reconfiguring the roads, it might mean adding more parking and so forth. Sorry, we're going down into the weeds.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I live in a small neighborhood just north of LA called La Cañada, and we have these meetings all the time about, well, should we put a traffic light here, or can we add pickleball courts over there? And it's always like this, basically, it's one party saying, yes, we absolutely need this, and there's another party saying, no, but if we could provide simulations of like what would actually happen with real data and like real change, we could visualize it, I think that would go a long way of helping people get closure and understanding about how their lives would be impacted.
If they feel very strongly about one version, they can actually see what the impact of that version would be, right? Maybe they're right.
The 80-year-old lady who's lived there forever, and it's like, I don't want 7 cars coming down my road in the middle of the afternoon, can now say, well, it's only going to be 6 because we modeled it out, or whatever it is. But I really want you to talk about this thing that you mentioned to me when we were last talking about this deeper into the industrial metaverse, not just from the like manufacturing and production side of things, but you talked about the mining side of things, what I thought was really
Oh yeah. So that's also like, you can make these models for subsurface things. So for instance, I'm working in New Mexico right now where they have a lot of mining. There's a lot of like traditional fossil fuel. There's also wind farms, so they have a lot of renewable energy as well. And they also do mining. And they also have a water problem like many Western states. And they have a wildfire problem. All of these things can be modeled in 3D. And so this is a super fascinating idea, right? Because it spans the whole state, the big scale project. I can tell you right now, mining and energy companies are super into this idea. Interestingly, more for renewables. They're not so concerned about proven reserves because they already have like geological data about that, but we could also model that as well. The state of Texas has a whole model of all the proven reserves, all the proven oil reserves, and the aquifer. And it's partly because they want to make sure they don't drill into the aquifer by accident. So I guess that's kind of a geeky example. But here's the point. In the process of doing a strat planning project a few years ago, one of the things I noticed is that there aren't enough 3D developers. In fact, there's not even 4 million people in the world who do real-time 3D development. So there's a very shortage right now. If you have those skills, you're going to get paid a lot of money because those skills are in great demand, not just at game companies, but also now for virtual production and motion pictures, metaverse where it exists, and as I'm describing, increasingly in industrial uses. So there's a need for more and more developers. And so I started to think like, wow, a lot of people are worried about AI stealing their job. If we went around the world and started to create training centers, like let's call them centers of excellence or training hubs for real-time 3D to teach people how to do this and how to develop solutions for their community, then we can actually create a lot of good jobs. These are excellent jobs. They pay very well. They're creative jobs. They're engineering jobs. They require intellect. They're future-proof in the sense that an AI is not going to be doing this work anytime soon. And so they're just getting a great agency. You can work for a company, you can start a company, you can pick the kind of industry you want to be in and so forth. So they're great jobs. So what I've been doing for the last 18 months is going around the country, talking to different communities. And by that I mean city government, state government, local universities, colleges, technical colleges, and other training centers, and local industry to find out what their needs are for real-time 3D, and to find out if there's a willingness to cooperate in a collaborative way, a coalition, to foster the development of real-time 3D skills. And we're now active in 3 different states. We've got 6 more states in discussion. I'm also talking to the governments in Nigeria, Botswana, in Philippines, South Korea, and Vietnam. So this is kind of gaining traction. But the notion is quite straightforward. It's an idea anybody can take, which is if you want to create thousands of good jobs in your neighborhood, create a training center for real-time 3D. I'm proud to tell you that Unity is one of the partners in that, and they have an aggressive education program, hundreds of people that work on this, and they've been a great partner. They have a lot of great educational curriculum. Of course, their goal is to get this technology into the hands of more people, of course, but they also understand that there's this rising need in industry for these skills, and they're not widespread. And I think for like people who are outside of the game industry or outside of fields like architecture, for us to have agency in the kinds of discussions you were talking about, like decisions that are going to impact our neighborhood or our city, it's important for us all to develop a facility to think in 3D. So I think getting these skills out to more and more people is a great thing. Now for a community, the impact is unbelievable. The average salary in this field is about $100,000 a year. Each job that we create will create about 5 more jobs. So for each engineer, you get project managers and artists and developers and so forth around that. And so 100,000, let's say 1,000 people earning $100,000 a year, that's $100 million of taxable income for the state. So any money the state puts into this, they're going to get back in the form of income taxes. And so it's one of the most no-brainer workforce development projects in the world. And I can talk about it publicly because it's like, I want everyone to go do it. Like, go take this idea and run with it with your community. It's an awesome thing to do, and in the precious moments you've got on this planet, go create great jobs for other people.
So in that, there was a nugget that you mentioned, and we've kind of been dancing around this topic, but AI is like one of the most, the thing that and all of a sudden, all the air got sucked out of the room by this thing called AI, and you've mentioned it a little bit, but can you talk about where you think AI is going? I know you mentioned that you think it's a positive thing, and I think the podcast that you did with Shelley Palmer was really interesting because you talked about you had a really interesting concept in there, and he was talking about how these things were going to become technology that's the human nature is always about improving productivity and making things better, cheaper, or however faster. But you had a stance on that. I want you to share that.
Well, let's start with the jobs thing. So everybody's heard this thing that AI is going to take your job, right? There's a report that came out from the University of Oxford about 2017 that said about 50% of jobs are vulnerable, and then there was another report that came out about 6 months ago that said some 300,000 jobs will be eliminated or something. These are scary numbers, right? So what this does is it scares people. People are like, oh, maybe my job is the one that's going to get destroyed right now. And we have a Writers Guild strike going on right now, and this is a primary topic, right? This is an item in contention, the use of AI in professional screenwriting. And so people are worried about it. And it doesn't help, frankly, that the leading companies and the leading researchers in the category have been issuing these scary pronouncements. You know, every week it seems like there's another announcement from some group of AI researchers saying, oh, this has the potential to be an existential threat for humanity. I think that's a little rich. I mean, we're talking about ChatGPT. It's a glorified, glorified chatbot, and they think that's going to somehow be the equivalent of nuclear weapons. I don't think that's the case. I think it's smart to put some guardrails around it, but I think that's what that hype does, that fear-mongering does, is it paralyzes most people. It makes most people feel powerless. And a theme I'm going to return to tonight, and return to every single time I talk about this, is agency. I am committed to giving people agency so that they feel like they are in control of their future, they can control their destiny, that they have everything within them to make an intelligent decision about their future that's not being imposed upon them by somebody else. The problem is the way the AI story is being told right now, it's a technology that we didn't ask for. None of us raised our hand and said, gee, I'd like an autocorrect that can actually spell properly and finish my sentences better than Siri. We never asked for that, it came, it's been foisted on it, and all of a sudden, if you are a professional person who deals with words or images, you now have to worry about your existence. And that's scary. And what's being proposed is basically, oh yeah, we'd like to insert a layer of software between you and the canvas that you work on, whatever kind of art you do. So instead of a paintbrush and paint, now you're going to have to rely on somebody else's third-party software. You're going to have to pay a license fee to use that, to do your craft. That's fucked. I hate that story. So I'm like, okay, let's push that aside. How is this empowering and good for us? And of course, there are lots of positive applications of AI. And I'm anticipating that it's going to be a net positive for us. But that's not the story we're being told right now.
Yeah, and you in that podcast, a term was introduced called AGI. Can you? I think not everybody has heard about what that might be.
So that's the scary thing, right? That is artificial general intelligence. And so what we have right now are these very narrow intelligences, and they're kind of brittle, and they don't do everything well. ChatGPT does kind of one thing well. Midjourney does kind of one thing well, and they won't do it that well yet. They'll get better and better, and it's quite impressive how much they're improving.
Are those of you in the audience familiar with how AI works? Like what a language learning model does? And we always talk about this dire future, like Terminator style thing, but from listening to you and understanding more about AI, the description is far less scary, I think. But when
these things that we have today are tools. I mean, Evo Hanning here, she's one of my heroes. Raise your hands, everybody can see her. So, about a year ago, when frankly Midjourney kind of sucked, I noticed on Facebook that Eva was posting these pictures, and I'm like, damn, she can make that thing do stuff I can't do. I'm a painter. I'm like, I would love to learn how to do that. So I started paying closer attention, and she embarked on this quest to become good at prompt craft and focused on the generative visual image making tools. And still cranking out something like 20,000 images a month, right? So you really went deep into the rabbit hole, right? And today, this is a year later. So first of all, Midjourney 5, pretty amazing, right? The progress in just a year. And today, Evo is now running workshops all over the world for people, teaching them, empowering people to use these skills, to use these tools for themselves, to tell their own story. And think about it. You're taking somebody who can't make an image. They don't have the gift of drawing or painting. And you're equipping them with a way to express themselves visually. That's an awesome upgrade for humanity. That's a great thing, right? I see no downside here. It's a tool.
It's a great democratization of creation.
So the scary story about AGI is that eventually these things are going to get so smart that they become sentient, that they can think for themselves. And then somehow that they're going to take over the world. Now, there is an awful lot of assumptions behind that story, and I've compressed it down into 2 sentences. If you want, there's plenty of places to find the scary story. It's like science fiction. First of all, that assumes that these things have motivation. I got news for you. It's an algorithm. It doesn't have motivation. Secondly, all the bad behaviors we're projecting on it, that's anthropomorphizing technology. It's a machine. It doesn't think the way we think. It doesn't even think like us. It does think, which is weird, but it doesn't think the way we think. We, as humans, have evolved over millions and millions of years to survive in an unfriendly world, a hostile environment. And as a result, we have a lot of maladaptive behaviors. Domination, greed, control, lying, manipulation, beating people up, threatening, using violence. There's a lot of stuff humans do, right? And when we see a machine that we created that looks like us, it might be smarter than us, we project all that nasty stuff onto it. But those machines did not evolve that way. They don't have a reptile brain. They don't have fight or flight. They don't have those impulses. Like you can't do a Freudian analysis on an AGI. First of all, it doesn't exist. But there's no evolutionary mechanism there driving it, so it doesn't have those embedded behaviors. They're not likely to manifest unless we program them in. And that's a human thing. That's a human thing, right? So yeah, that's a problem. I was at one university recently. And they're like, we have an autonomous vehicle program. We want to show you how we're building autonomous vehicles. I'm like, that's cool. And of course, they're all using the Unity model and stuff, so that was kind of fun to look at. And they said, yeah, we're doing a project for the Department of Defense. It's an autonomous military vehicle. I'm like, that sounds cool. Let's go check it out. So we walk in this room, and there's this skeleton of a vehicle with treads, and I'm like, fuck, you're building a robot tank for the military. And they're like, well, not quite yet. I'm like, come on, like, look at this thing. There's like a little tiny tank thing. It's amazing and scary. So yeah, that's coming as well, right? And DoD is funding. It's not just the DoD. Every defense department in the world is focused on this. So there is definitely that scary element as well, right? If you want to dwell on the scary side, it's a lot. I'm not focused on that in my own life. It's just not right. I don't think it's constructive to spend a lot of time dwelling on that stuff. These tools are very powerful. AGI does not exist. These machines are not sentient. They're not going to kill you. But for people who are worried about jobs, it is a legitimate question. How's this going to change my career? So again, what I'm trying to do is employ people or help them get the skills to be employed themselves in constructive ways, building out virtual worlds. I think what I would drive at here is this. We talk about stuff as if it's all separate. So NFT is one thing, and then virtual reality is another thing, and then over here you've got some kind of like intelligence, whether it's general intelligence or just artificial intelligence, and then 3D worlds. And it's a continuum, right? It's a spectrum, or it's a palette if you're a painter. And you can pull from all these colors. And we're starting to build like a digital toolkit for the next phase of evolution. So what happened, when I wrote about it in my book, which I have a couple copies for people tonight to give away, that book was about replacing physical stuff with software. And that was the process of the smartphone. The smartphone absorbed all the functionality of physical stuff. If you think back like to 2006, ancient history at this point, when you walked around in an airplane, people had Game Boys and MP3 players and DVD players. Nobody carries that stuff. You can't even buy a DVD player anymore because all that functionality has been absorbed into your phone. So that's dematerialization into software. The next phase of digital technology is going to be the inverse of that. It's not going to be absorbing the functions and making things disappear. It's going to be about virtual overlays on real world stuff. Because there's a lot of stuff we can't dematerialize a car, we can't dematerialize food, we can't dematerialize a house, but we can enhance them all with an invisible layer of software that becomes visible to you if you're wearing the right headset, if you've got the right device, or whatever. Right now it's a mess, because it's early stage still, but we have the building blocks, we can already identify them, and they're getting better and better. That was one of my big take on the Vision Pro, the Apple announcement, was, holy cow, they pulled it all together. And that thing, I know it's a lot of money, but if you look at the specs on that, it's an unbelievably powerful device. They designed a whole new chip and a whole new display, 4K in each eye. That is an incredible technological achievement. It's expensive today, but remember what I just told you about price, performance, and processors. It's going to get cheaper and cheaper. That's the most expensive it's ever going to be. By the time consumers get their hands on it, because that first version is for developers, it's not for you. It's to get people excited about it and to make sure developers are out there building cool stuff. By the time they have a consumer version, it's going to cost $1,000 or $2,000 less. It'll probably cost half. But that device is a phenomenon, and it's the beginning. That's the worst that device is ever going to look.
It's like the iPhone 1, the first generation of it. For a year, nobody wanted the iPhone.
The first iPhone, remember 2007? It was like a disappointment. I was working with Nokia at the time, and they were like, well, it's kind of like a lame phone. Everybody underestimated Apple because, they did the Steve Jobs thing. They pulled those three functions together, but it was kind of slow. It was very expensive. It was 3G. It wasn't really futuristic in any way. And there were no apps. And it was very expensive. And so a year later, they introduced the App Store over Steve Jobs' objection, because he didn't want that. But once they had that, there was this sort of platform for creativity and innovation, and then consumers got it. And then we also got 4G, right? So around 2010, 4G rolled out, and Apple rolled out worldwide to put iPhones in everybody's hands around the world. That's when it became powerful. It was a couple years later. So with Vision Pro, it's like, okay, that device we just saw on Monday is not going to be available until a year from now, and probably priced to the point where it's only for developers. So the consumer version will be 2025. By 2025, just think about how much the things we've been talking about will improve. Just think about how much Midjourney has improved in just 1 year. Just think about how much an NVIDIA processor improves in just 1 year. A couple of years from now, the price on all that stuff is going to drop. So I'm actually very optimistic about that.
Do you think you could talk a little bit about, this is something I think is really fascinating and exciting, about folks that have disabilities and the kinds of things that this technology can provide. And I think something in particular that's interesting is supporting people in the different ways that they learn and providing like AI to like as you know, tutor assistant, helping with people who have maybe like different motor skill limitations or mobility issues and things like that. Do you have things that you can share that you think are exciting,
yeah,
or predictions around technology that can help folks?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing, GPT-4 is multimodal, right? What does multimodal mean? It means you can talk to it with words and it can give you pictures. You can talk to it with words, it'll give you software code, it'll develop a web page, right? That was a very, very important point when that was introduced in March. Because previously it was single mode, so if you put in text, you got text back. If you talked about an image, you got an image back, right? But now we can use words to generate all sorts of outputs, different modes. For people who are differently abled, this is their access. This is a leveler, right? Because it means that machines will be able to communicate with us in the way that we communicate the best. I think Ian Donahue is here. Ian is very focused on making the web accessible to people who have different impairments, whether they're visual or auditory. AI is going to greatly help that. It's going to automate a lot of what currently isn't being done. It's not like they're taking jobs from anybody. These are jobs that just aren't being done, making the web accessible. So I think that's going to be very powerful. In terms of learning, the most exciting story I've heard about these generative AI apps is imagine having an intelligent tutor as a child, and that tutor grows up with you. And so whatever you're reading, that tutor knows what you're reading, the tutor can ask you questions personalized to what you just read to make sure you understood it, and have a conversation about it. So you're processing what you read through all the motor centers of your brain, and you've got this personal companion that's tracking you with it. And imagine a generation of kids, and I mean like soon, in a year or two, a generation of children are going to grow up with an AI companion that is their personal guide, mentor, advisor, and so forth. This is an incredibly powerful possibility. And it will be available, right now this stuff is available for free, so it will be available to everybody. It won't discriminate by race or by gender or by digital divide of some sort. The last thing I want to offer is this. We have been making a special effort to reach out to people in indigenous communities and historically marginalized communities to bring these tools and skills to them. And this is a mission that all of my partners, including Unity, share. This is central to every project that we do. So I know it's a little weird, you have an old white guy on stage, it's like you're totally lost in your groove here now. But the people that I'm working with are active in these communities, and we're bringing these technologies to these communities because we think it's extremely important. And there are many, many exciting examples. One I'll share with you. There's a group of researchers at the University of Idaho that are working with indigenous tribes all over the world. And they're creating VR experiences for them so that they can preserve ritual practices in a virtual environment. But that's not all. They've networked these communities because there are about 350 million indigenous people around the world. They're all disparate, they're spread around, they're geographically dispersed. They're not all in the same neighborhood. But now those different indigenous groups can see each other's practices and start to develop affinity and connection and community. So again, I think like a decentralized community of indigenous people unifying through virtual media. It's a powerful and exciting concept. Native elders don't always love digital technology because from their viewpoint it's a way to impose Western culture, the kind of culture they're trying to fight against in some respects.
About hosting our own metaverse on our own platform, our own computers, or our own platform that's on the web per se, or should we think about, to either or, should we concentrate on building this 3D world for those who are builders locally on our own?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually kind of like two flavors of the same question. So let's take the industrial one first because we can answer that. We know what they're doing. Typically, these are private industrial concerns, and the information that's being shared is real-time data from their facilities. For obvious reasons, they don't want that going outside into the world, so that is not on the internet. It's privately hosted on their premises, on their equipment, for that reason. And it's usually used by a relatively small group of people in strategic planning. But there's one case study or example I'll give you, which I think might show you how this opens up in an interesting way. So one of the projects that Unity has recently done that I think is inspiring and cool is the airport in Vancouver, YVR, the big airport in Vancouver, International Airport, complex project. They start out just focused on one aspect of airport operations. They build a digital twin, successful. Then they were asked to add another layer, and another layer, and another layer, and now suddenly they have a full-on 3D model of the entire airport. Every vehicle on the ground, every passenger vehicle coming in, everything in the parking lot, every airplane in the sky, every airplane on the runway, every airplane at the gate, or in a hangar. So like they have an operational twin that shows them where everything is and the people. It doesn't show you real people, it shows you avatars, but they're using cameras as sensors so they can actually replace individual people, no private data, nobody's getting their face scanned here. But they can populate the airport. So if all the people are running in one direction, the operational people and public safety can see that and try to figure out what's going on and know where to send people. If they want to strip away all the stuff and just see where the airplanes are, they can look at it through that view as well. Now that airport happens to sit on indigenous land. So the First Nation tribe owns the land that airport is on. And so part of the project was to create jobs for that community. And so Unity, along with building this digital twin, has a training program where they are training members of the tribe how to develop and how to manage real-time 3D digital twins. And so now the tribe has started to say, well, okay, we'd actually like to turn this into a showcase. Now, if you've ever flown through YVR Airport, you might notice that there's a lot of tribal artwork as you come through. One section has a huge boat, like a whole dugout canoe, and so forth. And so now the tribe is starting to build digital replicas of their art. And they're incorporating that into this thing, and they're building NFTs around them as well. So that's a story of empowerment, it's a story of art, it's a story of culture, and it starts out with this completely boring functional thing of like, we just want to know where the cars are on the runway, right? But it gradually became this bigger thing. So it's also environmentally sensitive land, it's in a wetland. And so Unity now is tracking emissions. And this is actually one of the cool things about digital twins. You know, we think of digital twin as a replica of what exists in the real world. But the digital twin can also allow us to see things that we can't see with our eyes. And so now they can track the emissions of airplanes that are coming and the emissions of airplanes that are on the runway that are idling and so forth. They can visualize that. So they can start to see if there's a buildup of emissions, for instance. So this has been so successful that they're just growing this digital twin. And this is where I want to go with this idea. My forecast for how the metaverse is going to unfold is that it will be a network, an ever-growing network of digital twins. We're going to start to build digital twins for one purpose or another, and we'll start to network them together until gradually we start to have, think of it as like growing skin, growing a digital skin or a digital nervous system around the entire planet. We'll start to have digital representations of every aspect of the planet. Some of them will be purely functional or purely operational. Some of them will be purely aesthetic or entertainment focused. But you'll have layers of digital twins. You'll choose which ones you want to opt into, or maybe there'll be access control, which might be in the form of an NFT that'll govern your ability to access certain levels or not, depending on which organization you're with or what credentials you happen to have. So my view is that in the future, you're going to probably see a multitude of different immersive worlds, or VR overlays, or mixed reality overlays, and people will have the ability to choose which ones to participate in. And yeah, ultimately, I think we're all going to start to build our own versions of this world. It's a very empowering story. I know it's a long answer, but you want to kind of build this narrative from what we know already works, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for hosting. This is Brandy Vale. I'm fresh out of AWE-XR. I was speaking on EdTech and the future of work and upskilling. I know you were talking about the positive impact of AI and so on.
Did I get it right?
Say again?
Did I get it right?
Oh my gosh, you're checking off all the boxes. Yay. So I had this vision for a very long time about the future work and universal income. And so for reverse engineering, I'd like to know where you see education headed between the ages of 5 and 15, and if we can start analoging, if you will, their skill set to give them assets for the future to reinvest into their education long term. Is that something that you've thought about? Now, I know future of work,
I don't get it, sorry. What kind of assets are they gonna invest in?
project-based learning assets while they're in
Okay, what's an
primary
asset?
school.
Is an asset a financial asset, or is it a
NFT.
Oh, no, I don't see that.
You don't see that happening?
No, but listen, the educational, if you're in that field, you have my sympathy. I extend to you every kind of support you can possibly have. It's rough. It's institutionalized. It's top down. It's regulated. It's government controlled. It's like the worst space for innovation. It'll suck the life out of you if you're in that space.
I just shifted
I
careers.
speak from experience. So here's what I think is going to happen. And you kind of already see this happening in the United States. Parents are going to take control of their kids' education. Many, many, many American families, it's not just Christians, are homeschooling. Every hardcore computer geek that I know is homeschooling his child, or her child, because they don't want their kids to be mediocre. They want excellence. The advent of AI gives us an opportunity for, again, families to have agency over what their children are learning and how they learn it. And I'm not sure how this is going to work because this system I'm describing doesn't exist yet, but you can see it very clearly as an option, right? It's like in the UK, they've got public health care, universal health care, which we don't have in this country, which leads to all sorts of labor mobility problems. But in the UK, they have, everybody gets health care, but it's kind of general health care. It's kind of like the government health care. And if you want, optionally on top of that, you can opt into private health care, and many people choose to do that. So if you can have that in addition. By the way, we can do this here in the United States for about the amount that we spend on Medicaid and Medicare. Sorry, different topic, but it's like our regulatory environment, our top-down regulatory environment in the United States has so stifled innovation, and we squander enormous amounts of money. Imagine if on top of the public school education, parents had the option to add in a private tutor in the form of an AI that's tailored for the interests of the son or child or daughter and to the values of that family, that community. That's what's missing right now. That doesn't show up in the education system that we have today. So I'm optimistic about that in the future, but I'm not optimistic about that happening inside of the bureaucracy of the education system.
I have two children, 9 and 11-year-old. I think one of the craziest things is how they're not allowing children to advance at different levels and at different paces, and they're really flattening the education system so that everybody has to be the same. They all test the same standards, they all do the same thing, and it's really quite frustrating. I'm excited for new technologies, and I'm sure my kids are very excited to write research papers with AI and stuff like that. But
it's the whole thing, right? Like the AI comes along, ChatGPT comes along, and the reaction is, it's bad, ban it, get it out of the class. It's like, whoa, hang on. How might we use this? How might we use this? Right? And there's a lot of examples. If you don't mind, I'll give you an example. Okay, so Unity has developed a tool called EdLab. And I learned about this because as I went around the country, I was talking to colleges, and several colleges said, by the time students get here, it's too late. Do you have anything for people in high school or grade school? So I went back to Unity, I was like, do you have any 3D, like real-time 3D tools for kids, like for students who are younger than college age? And they're like, oh yeah, we have a whole bunch of, they have a whole Educate site with a ton of courses you can take for free if you want to learn this stuff. And they also have a program called EdLab, and EdLab is something that the high school can offer to students in computer science. So if you're taking AP computer science, any people teach, has anyone been a teacher? I've been a teacher in both school and college. So typically the experience you have, tell me if this meshes with your experience. You'll have somewhere between 25 and 40 students. I'm not kidding, 40 students in California, right?
Yes.
In that classroom, they're gonna have a distribution of skills. You're gonna have 5 students in that class that are quite gifted, and you can see that they're destined to go places. And at the same time, you have 5 students who need a lot of additional help. And then you've got somewhere around 20 students in the middle who, frankly, they're gonna get whatever they get out of that class. And you're gonna shuttle as a teacher between the advanced students who need to get pushed in order to achieve what's possible for them, and the students who need additional help. Ultimately, as a teacher, you're drawn to the students who need additional help, because you gotta get everybody through, right? That's the problem. So that's how you level down to, like, unfortunately, it's the lowest common denominator. I hate to say it that way, but that is the experience that we have in school, because as a teacher, you want all 40 kids moving on to the next level. You don't want anyone to repeat, right? That's a problem. So here's how EdLab works. EdLab says, okay, here's a self-paced learning program for the most advanced students in the class. Those students are so advanced in computer science that they've blown past the regular curriculum, and they're idle, and they're bored, and they're gonna get into mischief. Give them EdLab instead. So now those top 5 students can teach themselves 3D skills, such that at the end of one semester, or one term, they're gonna have built a game on an Android phone that they can show to their parents and say, check it out, I made a game. Like, that's a pretty awesome thing if you're 16 or 17 years old, right? But not only that, what happens is you have peer teaching. So those students who are so far ahead, they're gonna blow through that material really fast, and then they come back and they act as almost co-teachers, peer-to-peer teaching in the classroom. That frees the teacher to focus on the students who need the most care and attention in the classroom. Everybody gets a better outcome. So once again, I can only see this through the eyes of optimism. I see all the issues, I see all the problems. I think technology, in the right hands with the right amount of imagination, solves tremendous numbers of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely the case. And right now, you know, they have one-word questions that they ask Siri and Alexa. But I'm just thinking about the future where, you know, these models are much more conversational with them, and they'll basically have real-time tutors for any topic they want to learn about.
And they'll be testing you, right? The AI will be checking your work. You can't possibly do that right now.
Pretty fascinating. Do we have any other
questions?
I just want to continue some point. Hi, my name is Monica. I do IT and cybersecurity in both Web2 and 3 spaces. I have a younger brother myself because I'm the eldest daughter, you know, I take care of my siblings, and I've seen that where he's blown far past ahead in his homeschool curriculum, and I just want to bring that back to, like, you know, the point with bringing this technology to the most marginalized communities, like those in the indigenous community. Like, for example, you know, I'm finding my own indigenous roots and just kind of looking through as much history as I can through the lens of what relates to me, and I think AI would greatly help bridge those gaps. And I would tell my younger brother, like, oh, this is not something they're teaching in school because of, you know, those lowest common denominators. And so I'm just kind of bridging that gap for him. But I think AI is pretty exciting that when you're homeschooling, you can almost not only use those customized curriculums through AI, but kind of tweak them in the way that's most prevalent to you. So, like, I'm the way you are. I only see this through optimism, that, like, as much as there's a lot of inequality and there's a lot of, you know, things that kind of bring everyone down, I think this can only be used as a tool, not as a replacement for humans.
Yeah, great, right on. I love that. What is your younger brother interested in? Computer science or something else?
Funny enough, 3D.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk afterwards. If you have young people in your lives, also don't overlook biology, because that's going to be the bigger story of this century. Synthetic biology is the most amazing playground in the world. It's still like one of those permanent dawn industries where it hasn't quite matured. Although, if anyone got the Moderna vaccine, that's the first big product of synthetic biology. The concept of synthetic biology is that you can program a cell the same way you can program a computer. It's not a binary language, it's quadrary, but you can program it. And it's an astounding field. The science in it is working. It's very possible that we can tap the generative power of biology to produce things like new fuel, new kinds of food, even construct homes. You can program a plant to grow into a house. I know it sounds like science fiction, and it is, but this is a field that's happening right now. So if I were, like, you know, 15 years old, I would be in biology. And it's not like a wet lab thing with test tubes and white jackets and stuff. Like, it's all being done on computers right now.
Hi, thank you for this talk, and I love your optimism around AI. I just have some counterpoints to it, so I want to kind of discuss with you and see what you think. I'm going to do the best I can to kind of phrase this as succinctly as possible. But I mean, to start, you know, being a science fiction writer myself, you look at some of the old science fiction guys from the 50s, 60s, and what they predicted our future would be, and the kind of revolution. They went to Mars and all these other places, right? So we don't know what we don't know in terms of the future, right? But looking at AI and the exciting possibilities which I see, I still see the ability with technology to do more with less. And I think you're obviously a creative guy and a creative thinker, and I think anyone here that's a creative thinker, you can get on top of that and take advantage of that. But there's the masses that probably may not. And the ability to do more or less, even talking your modeling case, for example, as we get into modeling and more people learn modeling, then we scale that, and then the tools to do modeling become easier for the average person. They don't have to do as much to model. And knowing that speed at which technology evolves to make things simpler to do, at some point, there's a flattening of the need of people to do stuff that we need. And so that's where I think that a stipend economy is going to become inevitable at some point, because, you know, where are we always going to stay on top? Just looking at how education is behind and how people can't plan for the future and how many distractions we have and how, you know, that motivation to stay on top and to be, it feels like a lot of people are going to be left behind.
Okay, so your fear is that machines take our jobs. Did I get it?
Well, I think machines take a lot of the jobs.
Okay, that's the fear. I'm not equivalent, but okay.
Right,
I just
right.
want to make sure I get your point. So let me ask you a question. How many horses do you own?
10.
Oh, you do?
No, I'm kidding. Zero.
Well, how many horses did you bring tonight to come here?
0, of course.
Oh, you didn't ride a horse here. Did you ride?
Horsepower, but
Oh, you drove a car. Oh, okay. So you're probably aware that 100 years ago, we had a horse economy. There was like a horse industrial complex, right? And it wasn't just people who raised horses and fed horses and groomed horses. It was also bridle makers and the people that made all the gear for the horses and the people that made the saddles and the people that made the wagon wheels. How many wagon wheels have you bought in your lifetime? Okay, the point I'm making is that 100 years ago, automobiles were relatively new. And actually 110 years ago, they're quite new. They were a novelty item. Most of the roads had animal-drawn carts or animal-drawn wagons of some sort. And that horse industry employed a lot of people. All of those jobs are gone, right? Like anybody with the last name Wright. Wright was the word you used to describe someone who built stuff out of wood, like a wagon right? It was a job. Cooper is the name of someone who makes a barrel. Hooper is someone who made the hoops that go around the barrel. Like we actually have last names that exist that are kind of like, they remind us of a bygone era where those jobs no longer exist. The point is that the story of the Industrial Revolution, the last 300 years, is that jobs get destroyed. And every year, a certain percentage of jobs get destroyed. In a healthy economy, actually, this is necessary. It sounds evil, it sounds cruel, but it has to happen because productivity growth is the only way to create the pool of profit that you can use to raise people's salaries. Any other form of raising salaries is inflationary and it actually ends up eroding purchasing power. The only way to create the pool of profit to raise people's salaries is through productivity growth, and productivity growth implies job destruction. It has to happen. Sounds cruel, it's just a function of life. When I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, everybody I knew, every family on my street was a union member. They're all UAW. They all worked in auto body plants, Fisher Body, Ford Motor. They worked in some component suppliers for the auto business and so forth. And even when I was a kid, I'm like, I'm not doing that. That's a stupid job. Those jobs aren't going to exist in a few years. I was like 10, and it was like perfectly obvious. All my grade school friends went into those fields, and they had to go through that very painful process in the 1980s when those jobs didn't exist anymore. They were good jobs. They paid $25 an hour. You know, people drove Cadillacs because they worked for the Cadillac plant. They could buy them. They could afford them. One parent would work. That was a great lifestyle, but it did not last, right? And today, at that time, General Motors employed 500,000 people. Today, General Motors employs 50,000 people. They make more cars than they made back then. This is just the natural trend. The natural trend is that jobs get destroyed. So leaving AI out of it, right? We've heard the forecast that AI is going to steal jobs. In fact, those forecasts are low. They sound scary. Oh wow, a quarter of jobs are going to get replaced. Half of jobs are vulnerable to AI. The reality is that at a rate of about 4% a year, over 25 years, all jobs are replaced. It sounds really scary, but notice no one's unemployed. Right now we have, in fact, the lowest unemployment that we've had in our professional lives, right now, at this moment. So if the robots are stealing our jobs, how come we're all so busy? Actually, it's a little bit weird, right? Because we still have all the manual jobs. Like we have to do all the hard work. The robots are the ones that are writing poetry and making paintings and stuff. It's like, wasn't that going to be, we were going to get liberated from the hard work? So it's a weird paradox. Speaking of science fiction, we've all seen and heard those stories. I'm optimistic about this. Like, I don't cling to any of this stuff, and no one should. Don't cling to your current profession. Don't cling to your current identity. Don't cling to your expertise that you've got, because all of that stuff probably isn't going to last much longer. You have to get good at lifelong learning and mastering new skills and pivoting into the new thing and embracing it, right? Not as like something that's thrust upon you, but as an opportunity, and start to see it that way. I think you're going to gather from my comments tonight that I cultivate an attitude of optimism. But it's a realistic optimism, right? I'm not wild-eyed. I'm not some kind of like euphoria person or something. I'm like very practical optimist, right? And kind of a reluctant futurist, because I don't consider myself a wild-eyed futurist either. But I do think about this stuff carefully, and I try to use logic and reason to say, how plausible does that scenario seem? And you're right, science fiction writers get it wrong, but they also get it right. We wouldn't have communication satellites today if it wasn't for Arthur C. Clarke. And the list goes on and on and on of inventions that sci-fi writers have created. They're the inspiration. When I interview people on the show, one of the questions we always ask them is, what was your first experience of the future? And what was your first experience in science fiction? And the answer is always, oh, when I was a kid, I saw 2001, I saw Star Wars, whatever. You know, like it's really mainstream stuff, but that sparked an idea in that person's head. And today they're a scientist, they're a politician, they're an educator, whatever that person went on to become in their adult life. But they were inspired by that sci-fi story to imagine a possibility that they hadn't set their sights on fulfilling as an adult. I hope I'm answering your question. I mean, your question is a good one. It gets me going because, like, I think about this all the time. You mentioned stipend. Some people think that the solution here is a universal basic income. And I will tell you right now, it doesn't work. Like, I'm a super skeptic on a universal basic income. I know Andrew Yang ran on it, and all the tech pros are like, yeah, he's talking about automation, he's talking about UBI. The math, it doesn't add up. To do a very simple UBI in the United States, $1,000 a month or $10,000 a year, that's what Andrew Yang was running on as a platform. That would cost $3 trillion. The entire US federal budget is $6.5 trillion. They only take in $5 trillion in taxes. The other $1.5 trillion is borrowed. That's the debt that we have. We keep growing that amount. It becomes a big political issue. Where do you find another $3 trillion? The whole US economy is only $25 trillion. So are we gonna double the amount of taxes? Income taxes generates $1.5 trillion. A UBI would cost $3 trillion. So we're gonna double income taxes? I mean, people feel like they're taxed enough already. So it's simple arithmetic. If you look at the numbers, like what does it cost to run the US government and assume that people aren't gonna be willing to double their income taxes, where will you get the money to do a UBI? So here's why I dislike that idea. The people who push that idea are the technologists. It's a bunch of Silicon Valley bros. They invent the technology that disrupts, and the rest of us have to react to it. And people complain, and they say, hey, you're disrupting me, you're disrupting my career, you're disrupting my industry, you're disrupting my neighborhood, my community, and so forth. And the tech bros say, we don't have the answer, we just invented technology, and they punt the problem to government, right? So that's privatized gain and socialized risk. This is something that we should probably oppose. Unless you're a billionaire, it's probably something you should be opposed to. The idea that private companies create a problem and then they kick that externality out. They don't solve the problem. They create the problem, they push it out to communities, they push it out to local government, they push it out to state and federal government to solve. And then they also don't want to pay taxes. They don't want their taxes increased. So how do we pay for these solutions? So the tech industry is incredibly irresponsible, and yet we put these people on a pedestal and we worship them. That's perverse and weird. I have a problem with that. I got a real problem with billionaires. I don't see the point. Why do we have billionaires? Why does society tolerate this distribution of wealth? When half the population of the United States doesn't have enough money to pay next month's rent, right, in savings. People don't have $4,000 in savings, half the population. And less than 1.1% owns a third of the wealth in the country. This is a weird time, like in history, like 100 years from now, when they write the history of the United States, or maybe the decline of the United States, income inequality is going to be a factor in that. Now, the cool thing about the technology we're talking about, right now, they're accessible to anybody with a computer, and the cost of computing is coming down, which means more people are going to have access to computers. But you still have to pay for broadband, you still have to pay, it's not free yet. This is a real serious challenge. If you want to start to take on serious challenges, focus on income inequality, and the other piece of that is labor mobility. The fact that we don't give people free healthcare means people are stuck at their job. Because we have this stupid system from World War II where you get your health care with your job. I mean, it's like arcane. They couldn't raise salaries during World War II because there's a cap, government imposed, so then they gave people health care, and that became the way we did health care in this country. It's a stupid system. It's outdated. It was a bad idea then, it's a terrible idea now, because now you have a lot of people who hate their jobs, who are bound to their jobs because they've got kids, they're afraid to switch jobs, they can't be entrepreneurial because they can't take the risk, so they're bound to a job they hate because they need the health care. That's stupid. Other countries, and by other countries I mean all of them, offer universal health care of some sort. Like every industrialized country and most developing countries. If you look at a map of the countries that don't offer universal health care, there's the United States and then like Chad. I mean, it's really awful, but that's our peer group in this policy. And it's simply that we do not want to redistribute wealth in that way. It's a terrible policy because it stops labor mobility. It prevents people from taking risks. It stops people from being entrepreneurs. It prevents people from going and pursuing their vision and wanting to achieve their dreams and so forth. That's terrible. To steal somebody's dream because they need health care is just an awful outcome. I'll get off the soapbox there. But thank you for the really good question.
We're actually running out of time. I mentioned to you guys he could pontificate on all sorts of things. And Robert, can you tell everyone how they can follow and learn more about the things that you're doing with? Or
we
do
have
we have one more
one
question?
Yeah, we have one more question.
All right.
Last call, if you don't mind.
It's all right.
Yeah. Whoa. This is temperamental. Yeah.
I just wanted to essentially validate everything you were saying about the virtual production and the digital twin industry. I'm an XR rapid prototyper and virtual production specialist at Metaverse. We've actually been building that exact connected spaces and digital twin technology for many years, and actually created the virtual production system for the Lion King movie, the second one. And in my personal free time, I'm also really trying to push the edge.
Devouring the world. Right? You all heard that phrase, software is eating the world, from like 10 years ago. The new one is game engines are devouring the world, because the game engine starts with the game industry, but now it's starting to pervade motion pictures, which is what he was just talking about. What was your name, friend? Nick. Okay, so what Nick was just talking about is virtual production. We didn't really get into it tonight. It's a cool topic. You gotta have somebody come here and I know the guy. Like, if you can get on a soundstage where they're doing virtual production, you have got to go, because your eyes will pop out of your head. It is the most amazing thing. They're essentially shooting a motion picture inside of a game world. And then they're rendering just a portion of that game world on a huge LED screen. They call it an LED volume. But it's basically just a giant TV set in the background. And now, this is a technique that's only 5 years old. They've now got all these macros and stuff in Unreal so that you can actually calibrate the screen to the sensor in the camera, and it knows where the camera is positioned in XYZ space in the stage. And so the screen actually moves with the camera. So if you've got a camera on like a dolly with a jib arm or something, the background moves. And when you're watching this stuff, you're like, whoa, it's like, you get seasick because it's like the whole room is moving with the camera. It is the most amazing thing. And effectively for the motion picture business, it can reduce principal photography by a factor of half. So like you have literally 50% of the shoot days. Think about a movie. When you're shooting a film, you're spending $100,000. It's like the world's most expensive taxi to turn that machine on with all the crew, all the equipment, the soundstage, and all that stuff. To shrink that in half with this virtual production, it means you're either going to have more series, more people employed making more shows, which is a great thing for the motion picture business, or you're going to be able to produce cheaper, or produce, like there's a lot of ways to get a good outcome from that stuff. It's a huge topic. So that's just the first example of a game engine devouring the motion picture business. The next one, of course, is the metaverse. But as I've described now, things like digital twins for industry are starting to digitize, and game engines are starting to devour real-world factories and airports and roadway systems and so forth with digital twins. Easy forecast. In the future, we'll use those digital twins as operational tools to govern those things. In other words, the model will become the parent. The real-world implementation will become the child. And I got that from the CEO of NVIDIA, which is the company that powers all this. And he said, look, when we design a chip, that chip on the computer is as real as it's ever going to be. And the one we make in the factory is the child. The parent is the chip on the computer. That's a way to think about digital twins in the future. All right, so how to reach me?
Yes.
I have a Substack, so if you want to check it out, it's called The Owner's Guide to the Future. And it's tercek.substack.com. Please do check it out. I write really provocative and obnoxious, long-winded things about lately the writer's strike, of course. I'm for the writers. And but I write about the future there. And then I have the Futurist podcast, and if you check that out, please do tell your friends to listen to it. If you don't like it, tell your enemies to listen to it. It's thefuturist.com.
Highly recommend it.
Some of those hyperlinks are in the invite as well.
We'll share those hyperlinks on the follow-up email that you all.
And if this is your first time at this Web3 salon, I just want to underscore that it is truly the best thing I go to in LA. I don't miss them. Thank you for inviting me to them. So sign up for these things. Seriously, and there's Rod is back there. Ivo Haning is here. Rod will tell you about NFT drops in fashion. Ivo Haning will tell you about prompt craft. Ian Donahue, you still here? Somewhere? He's outside. Okay, Ian Donahue can talk to you about digital technology for people who have different impairments of digital twins, virtual production. Our friend Nick in the back of the baseball hat. So you've got the expertise in this room. Hang out, and we'll talk, and we'll talk about all this
We've
stuff.
got crypto tax expert over here,
that's
cash flow
great.
doctor. So, for sure. Thank you guys all for attending. We want to wrap up by thanking our sponsors. We actually have a representative from Brave who's been our title sponsor for the next few events here.
Thanks. Great browser.
Yeah, on that break.